All right. Lovely to see you all. Make sure my yes. So, lecture 4. As I say, what I'd like to do for this bit is build on what we were talking about last week. So as you recall, last week we did the stuff from Austin on this notion of speech acts. So doing something via the act of utterance that isn't just uttering, it isn't just saying something. And what we're going to talk about today is a very broad project to understand the nature of meaning, but also to kind of extend the discussion about speech acts to understand really what it is that we say when we make utterances. So it won't be building directly on the different kinds of actions we can take, but trying to understand what is actually conveyed when we make utterances. So in particular, what we're going to do is talk about this very broad project from Grice. Grice was a philosopher who largely worked in Oxford, concurrent with, just a little bit after, Austin and Searle and all of these people. His big project was, again, trying to characterize meaning, broadly construed, and thinking about the ways that people actually use language to communicate. In that sense, you can read it as standing in not quite opposition, but certainly in tension with some of the projects we talked about in the first 2 weeks, where they were really interested in just getting the semantics and then maybe coming back and thinking about how real people use natural language. Grice is interested in natural language as used by the kinds of people, to use the phrase, that you would meet on the Clapham omnibus, right? Meant to be the sort of the common man, as it were. Which is very satisfying because all of these guys are Oxford pricks, so they really kind of look down on the common man, but they want to use the way that he uses language. So we're going to start by talking about Grice's project very broadly, and then we'll go through Grice's theory of meaning subscript NN. Now, I don't think that this was mentioned in any of the readings that are the reading we had for today, but it's important to get a grip on this notion of meaning NN because it's kind of what's lurking underneath Grice's account of implicatures, and that's what we're really going to talk a lot about today. But we need to do this stuff about non-natural meaning first. It'll be helpful here. So we'll talk about this theory of meaning non-naturalness, then this distinction between what we'll call saying and implicating, and finally talk through all of the little nuances of Grice's theory of conversational implicature. So that's the plan. You know the drill, right? You've done this 4 times already. So let's start with Grice's project. And I just love the colors of this, and I only picked it because of the title, Dangerous Intentions. It gives you an idea of where Grice is going. So his big ambition is to provide an intention-based semantics. That is, we will understand the semantics, the meaning, in a very literal sense of meaning, of various expressions by thinking about the psychological backings behind when we use them. The intents that we have that we're trying to communicate or enact when we utter things. So our usage, our acts of communication will come first, and they will then dictate the semantics. Again, you can contrast this with the sort of thing where we started, thinking about Frege and Russell and Kripke, where they were more interested in let's understand the semantics and then try and recover back the way people talk. Again, that's really ham-fisted, but it kind of gives us a way in. Grice wants to reduce semantics to intentions. His focus is on the use of language to communicate, and his broad thought is that the speaker intends for an audience to believe what is being communicated. This is when, like typical speech, right? Obviously, the kind of intention here could be different if we're saying using misleading speech, or if I'm talking to you about fiction, my intent for you isn't to believe it, but to make believe it, to pretend. But again, the broad structure here is going to be the same. The intent determines the nature of the communicative act, and it will tell you what is being communicated. So in this sense, Grice's project is what we might think of as reductive and particularistic. It's reductive in the sense that we are going to reduce semantics to intentions. They'll be the foundation. And it's particularistic in that it's going to be individual intentions or individual intentions behind individual acts of utterance that will be the building block. So we'll get kind of general intentions or general semantics off the back of every single utterance from a particular individual with underpinning intentions to kind of build it up. So that's the broad structure. Intents will determine, the speaker's intent will determine the meaning of individual utterances. Collecting those together will then give us something like conventional meanings. And that is, if anything, the kind of very broad notion of meaning that we would have. Okay. So obviously then, the first step in this project is to pen down the relevant notion of meaning. Yeah, please.
Connecting the general semantics of the backs of the individual utterances.
Yes.
Is the way that he says how common man uses language.
So in a sense, right, this is a very, very broad project where he's just trying to get back at that notion of meaning that we started with. So the meaning, the linguistic meaning of words. And there's a sense in which Grice is going to say the really broad project is doomed to fail. The best you're going to get at the general level will be what we might think of as conventional meanings. And the conventional meanings will be characterized by the individual acts of communication using these words or this expression. And every one of those instances are fully determined by the particular intents. So, right, the man on the Clapham omnibus as an expression to talk about the common man. Why is that? Why does that expression have that meaning? According to Grice, it will be that there was a bunch of individual utterances where there was an intent to use that bit of language to convey that idea. And then over time, as more and more people did that, it became a kind of conventional structure. I can use that phrase now, and when I use it, I'm basically leaning on the intents of everyone who came before, using the phrase in that way.
This signifies the way that meaning changes through time by how people use the word.
So it allows for that kind of thing, right? It would then explain or very neatly fit with the idea that, hey, changing of usage over time could explain why there's change in conventional meaning. Yeah.
So basically, instead of starting with the conventions as we've done with the previous ones, it's just like, no, the conventions are all the way at the end of the analysis.
Exactly.
What we end up with.
Exactly. They are going to come last. Rather than, you might think of it as a kind of bottom up, right? Usages will then fix what expressions mean in this very broad, typical sense. Contrast that with things like Frege, Russell, and even Kripke, where the expressions have a meaning and we're trying to get to it. It will become a little clearer as we go through this notion of meaning. So, we're already into our second part. Grice's concept of meaning in. And we'll start by talking about why the hell am I using meaning in? Like, why the little subscript? Well, that's really important. And we can get a conception of it by thinking about two different ways that we, in English at least, use the word means. There's one sense in which we use the word means, where we say things like this. Those spots means that you have measles. So this is what Grice calls a natural notion of meaning, or a non-cognitive sense of meaning. In effect, these spots don't mean, in the sense of communication, anything. But what they are is evidence, right? If you have these spots, you must have measles. The spots are a symptom of measles occurrence. So means here isn't being used in the same way as when we're asking about the meaning of an expression. It's rather that, that is a sign that this is occurring.
So basically, this is the meaning of, hey, this is a causal or correlative relationship.
Something like that, right? It is telling you these spots are literally, it's a way to let you know that this is something that's happening in the world. You got measles. This is not what we're thinking about when we go after semantics. Right? This is not the same sense of meaning. The characteristics of natural meaning is that there is a requirement for success, right? X means that P entails P is the case. Those spots entail you have measles. You couldn't have those spots and not also have measles. There's non-objectifiability. Right? We don't have any kind of way where we can ask about what was meant by the use of X was P. They're agent independent. Most importantly, they're non-linguistic. And they involve things like facts. The first one is really the important one, the success clause. Right? The utterance entails P. So if P is false, the utterance is false. Yeah.
So success in the sense of felicitous?
Yes. Not just felicitous, sorry, to be very clear, not just felicitous in the sense we were talking about last week, but a literal entailment, right? If the first part is true, if X means that P, it entails that P is also the case. Contrast this with, hey, Nathan is hungry means Nathan is hungry. Right? That whole Nathan is hungry means that I am hungry doesn't entail that I am in fact hungry. Right? The expression meaning that I'm in a certain kind of state doesn't entail that I am in that state. That's the difference here. Natural meaning is going to do that entailment. Non-natural meaning, meaning NN, is going to fail. It's going to be linguistic. It's going to be agent dependent. And it is going to fail the success condition. So non-natural meaning, meaning NN, or communicative meaning. That's the kind of thing that we're after when we talk about semantics. That's also usually what we mean, in English when we talk about means. So Grice has an example. Right? On the old buses in London, you used to have a bell, and the bell would ring 3 times whenever it stopped to tell would-be passengers that the bus is full. So the 3 rings of the bell means the bus is full. But of course, it's not like it entails that. The driver could be wrong. What it is that the 3 rings is trying to communicate that the bus has enough people on it. Or at least something like that. Another one, a jokey one, right? Smith couldn't get on without his trouble and strife. That is a roundabout way to say Smith finds his wife indispensable. Why is it a roundabout way? It uses Cockney rhyming slang. Trouble and strife is wife. But of course, the fact that this expression means, non-naturally, that Smith couldn't get by without his wife, doesn't actually entail that he couldn't. It's telling you what this expression is meant to communicate. It's not telling you that what is communicated is the case. Yeah.
Why does he call it non-natural?
Good. So the contrast is really between this kind of thing, right? This kind of thing, where when we're really using meaning, we're using it as a sense of evidence. Right? And in that way, it's natural, because it's not really about our communication. We're using meaning in a kind of derivative sense. It's evidentiary. Then it's non-natural because it's not like nature is giving it to us. Right? why does this expression mean Smith found his wife indispensable? Well, that's not going to be anything we're going to look out into causal relations in the world settle. It's going to be something about how we talk. That's why. It's non-natural in the sense that it's not going to be independent of human behavior. It's going to be settled by what we've decided.
So dependent on human conduct.
Yeah. So importantly, non-natural meaning fails, to go back to the slide, non-natural meaning fails in every single aspect here. It's agent dependent, it could be objectifiable, it's linguistic, right? It's not necessarily fact involving, and importantly, it fails the success test. I can tell you what an expression non-naturally means without telling you that what it means is the case. Cool. Another way to get it, he has this, right? So have M, and the symbols in the arrangement below mean you have measles in italics. You have measles. Right? Note that M could be true even if you don't live in the US, you were properly vaccinated, like all good and sensible people. Right? Again, I hope you can start to see the idea. Right? Natural meaning is this necessary, successful connection. Non-natural meaning, it's literally just what we're after with attempts to communicate. So you can also see this, that it's linguistic, by thinking about this sort of quotation, right? Those spots mean he has measles. That's not right, unless the spots are laid out in a way that spells something like he has measles. And then this would be a joke. But I could say that, hey, this string of letters means he has measles. Yeah, it's just driving home the same point as before. It's linguistic. Those 3 rings on the bell means the bus is full. It's a way to say that. Doesn't necessarily entail the bus is full. So importantly, again, the general test is the success condition. The natural meaning cannot have the success failure. Non-natural meaning, sure, because it's just telling you what it conversationally means. It's not saying is the case. Okay. Clear so far? The general idea of non-natural versus natural makes sense? Again, if you find the natural and non-natural terminology unhelpful, the other way to think about it is to think about non-cognitive meaning versus communicative meaning. Non-natural is communicative. It's going to be about our language or about our attempts to communicate.
Can you also make a parallel with naturalism?
Yeah, kind of. In fact, that's sort of what he's trying to invoke, right? So the naturalism stuff would be tracking these kind of deep causal relations or metaphysical or however you want to characterize it. Right? Whereas the non-natural stuff ain't doing that. Yeah.
Natural was non-cognitive?
Yes, non-cognitive. And the reason it's non-cognitive is it's determined by the stuff out in the world. Our talking about it is our talking about it, but the actual natural meaning, if there is such a thing, is determined by the nature of the spots and measles, not what we say. Whereas all of the non-natural meaning is going to be determined by what we say. Because that's what it is. It's what it's about. Okay. So obviously natural meaning is kind of useless if we're interested in language. Because there's not really any natural meaning connections between words and what they non-naturally mean. If we're interested in semantics or philosophy of language, and we grant that there's no necessary connection between certain sounds or marks on the board and what they mean, we already buy in the idea that we're after non-natural meaning. It's communicative meaning. Cool. Okay. So, we're going to need a theory. We're going to need to understand when something non-naturally means whatever it does. So Grice gives us a couple options. Unsurprisingly, it's going to track down to intentions. We're going to go through this kind of quickly, so don't stress too much about every little detail, but we'll try and get to Grice's overarching theory of non-natural meaning. So a place to start, Grice suggests, is a causal account. Right? X non-naturally means something if and only if X has the tendency to produce such and such a cognitive effect in the hearer and to be produced by that state in a speaker. The problem is this just simply doesn't track anything properly. Grice's big issue with this kind of causal account is it fails to take into consideration intentions. It isn't necessarily about what is produced, but it's what's intended to be produced, because it could be misunderstood. There could be a non-natural meaning that is not taken up. It's not grabbed. So this isn't going to be right. It also has an overfocus on standard meaning or conventional meaning, because we could always use expressions to kind of play around with them. We could use them ironically. We could use them metaphorically. So this kind of account isn't quite tracking what Grice wants. Again, I'm going to go through this quick because it's not really our focus. So, first idea, taking the causal account, Grice suggests let's add in something like intentions. Instead of tends to produce, add intends to produce. So we get X non-naturally means that P, if and only if X is intended by its utterer to induce in an audience the belief that P. Now, problem is that we can have acts that are done unintentionally. So I've got Vim's handkerchief for whatever reason, and I'm just a clumsy idiot. I leave it at the scene. I can induce in the detective the belief that Vim is guilty. He's the murderer, say. But it doesn't non-naturally mean anything if I just accidentally dropped it. Of course, I could have done it with the intention to get Vim to be on the hook for the murder, because maybe I'm trying to throw Colombo off, whatever. But it's my intention that makes the big difference there. If I didn't mean to do that, if I didn't intend to induce that, then we'd have a problem. I would just be like, oh, Jesus, no, I just dropped that on accident. So, what Grice suggests is that we'll need a reflexive intention. That is, we'll need an intention on the part of the speaker that the person that's being spoken to recognizes the intention to get them to believe. So in this case, we'll need an intent for hearer to believe and an intent for hearer to believe that I'm trying to get them to believe. It's reflexive in the sense that not just do we need to have this sort of trying to communicate, but we need the other party to also know that I'm trying to communicate in this kind of believey way. That they're aware of my intention, my attempt to communicate. So you get this second clause, right? X means non-naturally that P, if and only if, X is intended by its utterer to induce the audience to believe that P, and the utterer intends the audience recognize that previous intention. So it's not just that I'm trying to, but that you acknowledge or recognize that I'm trying to. This kind of avoids the Colombo-style cases. It's guaranteeing that there is an intention and that all parties involved acknowledge the intention. And we have some kind of further cases where, okay, this doesn't quite cut it yet. Grice is a very funny one of Grice supplies Mr. X with a photo of Mr. Y showing undue familiarity to Mrs. Y, or Mrs. X, sorry. And in this case, it's an instance where we seem to have 1 and 2 satisfied, but we wouldn't really say that showing the photo non-naturally means that X and Y are having an affair. There needs to be a little bit more to it. That's what he's trying to get at, but it's not quite what the showing the photo non-naturally means. So we need a connection between intention and belief that the speaker is trying to induce. This gives us Grice's final account. 3 intentions need to be involved. The speaker must intend the audience believe P. The speaker have the intention that the audience recognize the intention mentioned in A. And finally, there's an intention that the recognition in B will be at least a partial cause for the belief in A. So the third clause here is basically saying, hey, it's not just that I intend to convey something and you acknowledge my intention to convey something, but the reason why you come to believe it at least partially hinges on my intention. And note, right, the important reason why this isn't just that there is a causal connection here is because that could fail. The non-natural meaning could not be taken up. For any reason. But importantly, the speaker needs to intend for this to be the case. So it still has the non-natural meaning, even if it's not acknowledged. It's just a failed act of communication. Okay. So again, we gotta have all 3. The speaker has to have all 3. We get this sort of neat capsule version of it. A non-naturally meant something by X is roughly equivalent to agent A uttered X with the intention of inducing a belief by means of the recognition of this intention. So this just packs in those 3 clauses. I'm trying to get you to believe that P. I hope that you acknowledge that I'm trying to get you to believe that P. And I'm hopeful that your acknowledging that will cause, or at least partially cause you, to believe P. Once you get the information, you recognize that I'm trying to get you to recognize the information. And that second recognition plays into why you buy it. We go anywhere else? Does it make sense? Do we kind of get the feel for it? Again, I know this is going really fast, but it's just to try and capture it down. Yeah, please.
So how does this work with
Deception.
Good. So deception is going to play around with one of these, right? I want you to believe that P, right? I want you to recognize that P. I want this to happen. Importantly, we can then add a clause, but I don't believe that P. Deception will tick all of these boxes, so it still not naturally means this. But of course, I also have an additional thing. I don't think P is the case. So remember, all we're trying to do is capture what the non-natural meaning of the expression used is. We can add additional intentions on top to say, hey, what is it going to be? And there's another version of this too, is like, what if I'm telling you something in a fiction? Well, I clearly don't want you to believe it, but I can make you make believe it. That's what I want you to do. Pretend that it's the case. And then it's going to be the same. You should make believe that P. I want you to recognize that I'm trying to get you to make believe that P. And part of the reason why you're going to make believe it is because of that acknowledgement. Again, you can see how this goes. That's actually a really helpful point, because that seems to suggest there's a difference between deception and fiction. Deception is still doing all of this. Fiction isn't doing this. It's doing something close but different. It's something we might come back to. Yes, please.
So in this account, what the audience actually thinks has nothing to do with the meaning. The meaning is only determined by what the speaker thinks about the audience, intends to do, etc. But what the audience actually thinks is of non.
Which makes sense, right? Because again, what he wants to be able to say is that this had a non-natural meaning, but the audience didn't get it. If you made it such that it was always successful, it would be sliding back towards that natural meaning. The success conditions, at least something like the success conditions, would have to go through.
Yeah.
Okay. So he wants to be able to say, hey, the expression has non-natural meaning, but it failed to be uptaken. That happens. Could be because I don't understand. It could be because I fail to acknowledge what you're trying to get at. There's lots of ways this could break down.
Yeah.
Again, remember, this is an account of when does a particular speaker non-naturally mean something. Not necessarily when is it successful. Okay, cool. Yes, please.
The recognition of B
Yeah.
is also with the assumption that he understands it, right? That he understands and acknowledges the intention of person A. But isn't that begging the question, like, doesn't it kind of like leads to a regression in which like you need another person C that will check and acknowledge if B will check it or not?
In some sense, but remember, right, in this case, what we're saying is the speaker needs to have the intention that.
Yeah.
So we don't necessarily need to have someone go and do the kind of recognition, go and check and do any of that. We just need the speaker to have the intention that this is what occurs.
Okay, yeah. Okay, yeah.
So again, the intention is audience believes, audience recognizes intent to get them to believe, and that audience, because they recognize that, then comes to believe.
Yeah.
Those are all intentions the speaker has, wants to make these the case. Doesn't mean they have to.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So to make a linguistic play of words, if I'm understanding correctly, the recognition is applicable in the sense that it is a cognitive meaning.
Exactly.
So that's the reflexive element of the cognitive meaning.
That's the reflexive kind of thing back, right? The reflexiveness is that second clause, and then the third clause is because you've got that reflexive acknowledgement, that plays a causal role in getting the belief. One of the reasons why you come to believe P is because you've realized I am in good earnest ways trying to get you to believe it, and that is my intention. So importantly, note, the foundation here is going to be these intentions, right? Non-natural meaning is going to be understood in terms of these intentions, these complex intentions. So this is why, again, it's an intention-based semantics. The meaning of an expression, non-natural meaning, obviously, right, is going to be determined by these sorts of intentions. Cool. Okay. So we can just, again, kind of express it, right? Non-natural meaning is to be analyzed in terms of reflexive intentions. Intention to induce a psychological state, belief, in a hearer by means of recognition of that very intention. That's just another way to package the same stuff we said a second ago. If correct, it entails that speaker's meaning, right, a particular speaker's non-natural intended communicative content, is more fundamental than sentence meaning. So remember, we talked about this once before. We had the man who's drinking a martini in the corner as a kind of potential counterexample to Russell, where we use the definite description to refer to an object even though that object doesn't satisfy the description. There we had a difference between sentence meaning, what actually satisfies the definite description, versus whatever I was trying to get you to look at. I'm trying to talk about the dude in the corner. And I've given the wrong definite description, but we can still figure out who it is I'm talking about. So there was a separation between the speaker's meaning and what the sentence actually means. for Frege, for Russell, for Kripke, sentence meaning comes first, speakers misuse it. For Grice, speaker's meaning comes first. Sentence meaning is then going to be defined. Again, it's individualistic. Speaker's utterances, driven by intentions, are the foundation. So we can distinguish between what we might call relativized meaning and non-relativized meaning. Again, this is kind of coming back to some of the stuff we mentioned already. Relativized meaning is going to come first. What I meant by this string of symbols or this sequence of sounds is the foundational thing. And then the non-relativized is going to be defined in terms of how we've collectively come to use these sounds and strings. We're never going to be able to go from the general version to the relativized. We always go relativized, then generalized. Says Grice. Okay. So this is a really cool idea, and it sounds wonderful. It has one major problem. Right, there's a bunch of problems, but this is probably, I think, the biggest, baddest one. The biggest, baddest one is that this cannot be a complete account of non-natural meaning. An intention-based semantics cannot provide an account of non-natural meaning for unuttered sentences. English has an infinite number of meaningful sentences. Here's a really cheap way to go. Just say, like, the mug is on the desk, and add a conjunction. The mug is on the desk, and the mug is on the desk. The mug is on the desk, and the mug is on the desk, and the mug is on the desk. You can go like that indefinitely. Keep going. There'll be a certain point at which that expression has never been uttered. But it clearly and obviously has a non-natural meaning. But that can't be the case, according to this. Because in order for the expression to have a non-natural meaning, the sentential meaning, speaker's meaning had to come first. Somebody would have had to have uttered it within a reflexive intention for some audience together. So the problem, how can sentences that have never been uttered have meaning according to this view? They can't. Because you have to be uttered first, right? Speaker meaning comes first. The particular local actions come first. So how do we get sentences like this, right? Obviously silly, but it has a meaning. Yeah.
I mean, is there also an issue in the sense that in order to recognize what the speaker is referring to, what their intention is dependent on conventions that allow you to get to that meaning?
So not always. That's going to certainly happen at an eventual point. We'll have things like an ossification of certain intentions, where we get, as you put it, right, certain kinds of things become conventional, and then we can offload intentions. But importantly, Grice's story about how they become conventional will be that at some point back along the lines, people stumbling around desperately trying would just make noises with the intent of conveying certain information. So it's always going to be, according to Grice, reducible back down to intended, reflexive intended utterances. And then these might be picked up very broadly, and then it will become a convention.
It feels like the initial baptism all over again.
It is, exactly, right? In this case, instead of a baptism, it's a use. It's an intended, a reflexive intended use. But of course, for Grice, it's not fixed, right? If I really want to use a certain phrase to non-naturally mean something, but nobody else does, my non-natural meaning still goes through, but it will never get to be a convention. Too many people will disagree. But importantly, again, right, the problem here is that So we'll have meaningful expressions in the language that are simply never uttered. But there cannot be meaning for these expressions until they're uttered.
And why should they be uttered? Because there has to be an intention.
Yes.
So you could also say that the problem is that sentences without an intention cannot ever have a meaning.
Yes.
So if you encounter somewhere a sentence and the speaker is not around, you could have no clue what it means.
Well, remember, right, there's a difference here between what the sentence non-naturally means and whether that gets taken up, whether somebody grasps the non-natural meaning. So to go back, right, you could have some sentence that's expressed with these three intentions, nobody ever picks it up. Cool. It still non-naturally means that, just nobody got it.
Mm-hmm.
So our being able to grasp the non-natural meaning is distinct from what it is.
Between intention and interpretation.
Uptake versus what was trying to be conveyed. But of course, right, if you just literally have a string of, we get sometimes this talk about like, imagine the waves keep hitting a rock. And over time, as the water washes off the rock, it carves in something that looks exactly like the recognition of this intention, right? That would have no non-natural meaning. And that would have
Because
no
there was never an intention.
There was never an intention, right? It was not expressed by a speaker with the intentions behind it. And that's not an issue about us coming to get those intentions or coming to understand them or grasp them. It's just those weren't there. So that there's a difference here between what sets the non-natural meaning versus how do we get to it, right? Our epistemology about the non-natural meaning versus, again, if you like, the metaphysics of what they are. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, but I'm still wondering if you encounter somewhere a sentence and the speaker is not around, fundamentally not around.
Yeah.
It seems that you always need the intention to really understand what it means, because otherwise you can never be sure.
Yeah, that's okay. Right? Again, one thing that he will have in his arsenal that we won't really talk about much is that he can appeal to these conventions. Over time, through a bunch of intended uses, particularized, localized uses, you start to build conventions. And these conventions could then help us understand what the intendants might be. We'll never be 100% sure, which is fine. That's just the way it's going to go. But do we see again? Yeah, please, sorry.
Why does it matter if the unuttered sentence do not have meanings?
Good.
Because you don't talk about it anymore.
So that really the idea is just that it's a kind of reductio, right? If you grant that these sentences have meaning, but they're never uttered, then we're in a problem, right? Or Grice is in a problem. If you say, oh, they just don't have meaning, that's a move you can take, but then you have to explain why it is that at a certain point, when I say the cup is on the desk and the cup is on the desk and the cup is on the desk, I run out of meaning. Like, why is it that in like the 75th conjunct, because that's the point at which someone had said it, it's meaningful. But then when I add the 76th conjunct, I venture into the realm of meaninglessness.
But then you utter the sentence, so then it starts to have meaning, right?
Yeah. But again, what we're thinking about here is just the like prior to it. It doesn't seem like there is an arbitrary cutoff. That's the thought, right? It shouldn't be just simply because we haven't done the exercise of saying the cup is on and up to the 76th point, that's what's kind of making it meaningful. That's the worry, right? We can dig our heels in and buy that, and that's totally an option. But it feels very strange.
Yeah.
And again, it feels like if you want another example, right, just kind of think about another sentence that you haven't heard or that no one has ever heard, but pretty clearly is just a combination, it's grammatical, it's meaningful.
But can't you extend the idea of convention to combining sentences?
Absolutely. But note that in order to do that, there had to have first been kind of intentional use of the expressions. What we don't have here, to put it another way, is we don't have intentions about subsentential parts. We only have intentions about sentences, about whole expressions. What this is worrying about, to put in a very strong sense, is something we didn't talk about with regards to Frege and Russell, but they had this idea about compositionality.
I still don't get it. If someone utters a sentence for the very first time,
Yeah.
how can it have meaning then?
Good.
Because there is nothing like a convention or something. It's uttered for the first time.
So importantly, they'll have an intention to get the listener to believe the P. They'll have intention for the listener to recognize that they have the intention to get them to believe the P. And they have the intention that the speaker will come to believe P at least partially in virtue of recognizing those above intentions. So how does it start? This.
It seems that there still has to be something except for the intention of the speaker that still carries meaning. Otherwise, you can't convey the meaning, right?
So here's something that's a trick, right? Note that in order to get you to kind of get this, I need to have P expressed. I need to say P, right? So I need you to believe that P. But this is because what I'm trying to do is to tell you what the intentions are. I'm communicating to you what the underlying intentions are. But of course, the actual intention, depending on how we think about philosophy of mind, isn't necessarily going to be something expressed in any language, right? So don't confuse in this case my method of delivery, right, which it has to be in English, or not in English, but in language, versus the actual underlying metaphysics, right? The intentions are going to look like this. And now what kind of thing is the believes that P? Well, P doesn't have to be an expression of language. But obviously, if I'm telling it to you, it has to be, right? Because I've got to get that. So that I see what you're worried about. And like, there's a kind of regress of like, oh, but you'll need to cash out what P is, and that'll be more language. And then we're just off and running. But importantly, that's not something that is like, has to be expressible. It just needs to be some kind of proposition or fact, whatever you like. And the only way I can convey that to you is via more language. But the thing itself doesn't have to be more language. Does that help? Does that satisfy a little?
Yeah, more or less.
Yeah, I mean, I get the worry. I get the worry.
Yeah.
There's actually a difference between a conception of a proposition
Yeah.
and the intention of an utterance.
Good. So the conception of a proposition might be how you think about the content. Right? And this could be something that's from the speaker's perspective, could be from the listener's perspective, could be from somebody entirely separate, right? The intention is going to be, well, depending on which one we want to talk about, it's going to be, hey, I want you to believe this. Or I want you to recognize that I'm getting you to believe this. And so again, the this here, if I'm trying to convey it to you, I'll have to use language. But whatever the this is, it doesn't necessarily need to be more language. Right? It's raining outside means rain is falling outside, right? In this case, it's not, but you see the idea. Right? That's the important thing, right? I can't tell you that second bit without doing some kind of bits of language, or I can just go like, but that's a difference between how I can convey the non-natural meaning, like describe it to you, versus the actual non-natural meaning. Okay, good. So again, the slight worry here, not the slight worry, the deep worry, is that if there are meaningful expressions that haven't been uttered, Grice is in trouble. Yeah, sorry, did you have, yeah. Oh no, sorry. You leaned forward as again. There's another really interesting one, right? Another interesting problem here, which we won't talk about, but it's worth thinking about. What's Grace going to say when you're talking to yourself? Oh. He's got a story, right? So what do we think? Is Grace going to say that your expressions If you're sitting in a room by yourself and talking, he does want to say they have non-natural meaning, right? But importantly, how's he going to make sense of that?
Is there something wrong with it? I mean, you still can have the story of intentions and the audience. The audience are it's yourself.
That's the trick. You've got to be both the speaker and the audience. He thinks you are literally talking to yourself. So when you're doing this, you are both the speaker and the audience. It's an interesting view because it seems to not fit with the phenomenology. Because it's pretty weird to think about A and C with regards to yourself.
It's a kind of test.
Yeah.
Whether your sentences make sense.
Am I saying something meaningful here? No. So again, something kind of fun. But again, sorry, I'm using it again too much. What's important for us is to see Grice's big aim is to provide this intentional-based semantics. The grounding, the foundation is going to be individual usage underpinned with these reflexive intentions. Reflexive intentions in the sense we defined just a few minutes ago, right? Want you to believe the P, want you to recognize that I intend for you to believe the P, and you come to believe at least partially because of recognize my intention. So again, we've got this is just Platts driving the point home. What's important for Grice's view is very little weight is placed on the role of the words the speaker uses. We don't really care kind of what words are employed. It's just, right, what was the non-natural intention, right? What was the intention behind it? And notably, this account of non-natural meaning doesn't distinguish between what a speaker literally says and what is being conveyed. Because what's literally said is going to be some string of sounds or some marks on the page. What's conveyed is going to be potentially something radically different. And this is where we get to his theory of conversational implication. This is the stuff that we read about for today. So, we can get to saying versus implicating. Before we go on, though, we've already hit 1:40. Should we take a little break, or do people want to keep going? Either one is fine with me. How's everybody feeling?
Great.
I'm good. I don't know. You good? You good? You good? You good? A break.
Great, that's fine with me. Cool. So let's. So we'll take a break. We'll take a break to 100. That's good because I need to smash it. So we'll take a break to 150. That's okay. So 10 minutes, and we'll come back from there.